Probably got spreadsheets, probably got names and different things like that. You really got to mic me?
This is just for the video.
People watching in TV land?
On YouTube, yeah.
All right, excellent, excellent. Live, right, all right. Anderson Cooper, right? There we go. Yeah. All right, very good. Yeah, I haven't really started yet. We're kind of running behind a little bit. So, are you going to do like an official start or something like that?
Yeah, if you just want to say who you are, so I'll.
All right, let's do a quick start. We'll keep it informal then. All right, so I'm Ron Gula. I'm the co-founder of Tenable Network Security. I hold the CEO and CTO titles. We got some folks who want to talk about scanning, log analysis, possible replacements for certain vendors. Basically, I brought 200 slides. I'm more than happy to show them. But I actually brought live deployments of our product, doing the log analysis, the net flow, the scanning, the passive discovery, the configuration auditing from about 4 or 5 different networks. So typically I do a quick introduction, and then if you got questions, I'll just kind of drive that because chances are if you ask a question, I'm going to have a bunch of slides to back it up, but I'll show you that before we go forward. So most of you all out there know us for Nessus, right? We're the folks that make the Nessus vulnerability scanner. You can download Nessus from nessus.org. That's our website, tenablesecurity.com, nessus.org. But basically, we've got 3 major products to monitor networks. So Nessus being one. We're going to talk some nuances about Nessus, how you can do patch auditing, configuration auditing, database auditing now, things like that. But we also have a couple other products. One of them is the log correlation engine. The log correlation engine allows you to send netflow, syslog, firewall logs, anything like that. And it's kind of like an intrusion detection log for that. But rather than just looking for intrusion detection, it looks for change, correlated events, statistical anomalies, things like that. I can show you a demonstration of how we can look at monitor firewall logs and tell you when the first time we've seen a log from an IP address on your network, as well as a statistical increase in firewall logs from that IP. Very useful kind of stuff. Then we have another product called the Passive Vulnerability Scanner, which is a sniffer. You put this between your collision domains, your network and the internet, your network and the internet in the core of your network, and it sniffs all your vulnerabilities. So, Renaud Darrison's one of the co-founders of Tenable. Him and I were talking about, no matter how fast and accurate we made Nessus, when you put that packet on the wire, you never know if the next ping packet is going to take down your switch or your router. And if anything goes wrong during a scan, and things that go wrong in IT all the time, the audit guys get blamed. So we wanted to have a product that was 100% sniffing, 100% passive, and could do that. So that's a passive vulnerability scanner. We can talk about that a bit. We tie this all together with the Security Center. Some people consider the Security Center like a corporate scanning kind of platform, web-based. We can do stuff, but actually you can do log analysis with it, asset discovery, reporting, role-based asset control, things like that. So I'm going to be jumping around a lot. What happens is we live in Security Center for most of these demos. So you're like, hey, where'd that piece of data come from? I'm looking at the log data, but that was log data from Nessus or log data from the passive scanner, or looking at vulnerability data. Was it a patch audit? Was it a passively discovered? Was it a configuration? A lot of times people get, where does this data come from? We try to make that irrelevant so you can do whatever you need to do. And we call all this unified security monitoring. Any questions so far? All right, so I'm just going to hit a few more points in each of these products, and we'll get your questions. So everybody here use Nessus? All right, so a lot of Nessus users. So Nessus, it scans for about 20, 30,000 different checks. We do have an accurate count, but there's more every day, right? And typically, when you have Nessus and it does a scan, you get results like this. Hey, I found a certain port open, certain web server. Maybe it's identifying some things. Maybe it's not. It's very accurate at what we do. We work very hard at trying to make Nessus as accurate and fast as possible. When I talk to people who use Nessus, though, I always ask them, do you give Nessus credentials to actually log into systems and do a patch audit? And a lot of times that's like a hit or miss. Some people, I didn't know I had that feature, right? Nessus has full support for a ton of APIs, SMB, WMI, a whole bunch of protocols, Telnet, SSH, we can log in and do that. We just added support for SQL, where you can actually authenticate to SQL, a bunch of different protocols, and log in and do that. And the cool thing is that when you do these kind of audits, it's 100% accurate. When we do a vulnerability scan and we connect to port 22 or we connect to port 80, as much as we think we know what we're doing, we're still guessing, right? We're going to stimulate that service. We're going to get a response, and it's Apache. And even if we're 100% right and we know it's Apache, we might not know that the underlying system is Red Hat and you need Red Hat patch number 2005 to fix that thing, right? So the patch auditing, you have a certain amount of accuracy and a certain amount of reliability you just don't get with your network scan. The thing is, how long does a scan take? You know, I don't care how fast you can write a packet cannon and put packets on the wire. If you're going to do a 65,000 port scan for UDP and TCP, you got about 120,000 packets you got to put on the wire. And wait, that's a strain to your WAN, it's a strain to your backbone. With credentials, you just log on. You can ask how many ports are open. And you know, so there's a lot of advantages. So Nessus gives you the option to do both of those things. You know, maybe sometimes you want to take the hacker audit view. Maybe sometimes you want to have the credentialed corporate IT view. And you can unify both of those things together. Does that make sense so far? All right. So since we're on the host, we got into the business of configuration auditing. Nessus can perform audits for a wide variety of settings. If you're in the federal government, we do FDCC desktop, federal desktop core configuration audits. We also do things like Center for Internet Security. If you just want to do things like, you know, see what the password policy is in all your Windows 2003 controllers, we can do that as well. I have a blog entry at blog10ablesecurity.com that talks about how a lot of people had to react to this last MS-0868 type of vulnerability. And I said, great, you just scanned, you know, 20,000 corporate, you know, servers and desktops for MS-0868. Did you happen to audit the password? Because what's more easy to exploit, you know, this remote vulnerable, that was a pretty easy one to exploit. Or just, you know, admin, you know, how do we know what the password policy is there? And I got a lot of people saying, hey, you know, we didn't even think of that. Well, that's why we really say bring this configuration auditing into it. Nessus also has the ability to look at the contents of the hard drive. We have a lot of audit policies to look for pornography, credit cards, spreadsheets that have the word finance or salary in them, different things like that. We are not a DLP vendor. This is not a main thing that we do, but I have a lot of people who use this feature and love it. So it's really nice to do. What I like to also say, if this is of interest to you, Nessus and our other products are much more accurate at saying there's a server, it's sharing PDFs, and actually analyzing all those PDFs. So if you're really into that, you should probably go look at a DLP. But from an asset classification point of view, we can do a lot of stuff that's going to identify what's on your network. Any questions on Nessus so far? Okay. So we have another product called the Passive Vulnerability Scanner. Like I said before, it's a sniffer. The idea is that we're watching computers talk to each other, and based on that conversation, we're in real time learning about those IP addresses and their vulnerabilities. This works with client-side software. This works with server-side software. This works with just OS identification. It works in a wide variety of different types of networks and topologies. The data that goes into the PBS is the same research team that works on Nessus. So when we do a new Microsoft vulnerability, when we do a new Apple vulnerability, we try to say, hey, can we do a network scan for this? Can we do a credentialed audit for this? Can we do a passive audit for this? Ideally, we can do all three. With something like iTunes, where if you have iTunes at the desktop, or Skype, where you have a network daemon, you have stuff on the disk and you have stuff on the wire, boy, you can do a really good audit for stuff like that. For something like Internet Explorer, you can only do that by either sniffing traffic or logging on to the box. There's no way to remotely say what kind of browser am I having. So does that make sense? Okay, we can get more into PBS if people want to get into do that. But obviously, real-time change detection, different things like that PBS does. And then lastly, the log correlation engine. It takes logs, like as I said before, from servers, firewalls, NetFlow, operating systems. There's a wide variety of correlation. I'm not doing it justice. When we actually get into the demos and I can say, here's all the vulnerabilities for this IP address, and let's go look at the logs associated with that, you know, it'll be pretty good. But the thing we're trying to focus with the LCE is to actually differentiate change and compliance issues with actual compromise detection and insider threat. We can do things like, hey, let's look at all the firewall logs, let's tie them to all the users on your network, and then graph that. Hey, why does user A have 5 times as many firewall logs as user B? So we can give you those kind of visualizations and that type of analytical stuff. And again, all this is put together with the Security Center. So questions so far? We were talking ahead of time. I can go into some of the questions we talked about. Any questions so far at this point? Absolutely. Absolutely. So about a couple months ago, we announced a partnership with Immunity. And if we go to a blog entry on it here, basically Immunity is they make a penetration testing tool called Canvas. And what happens is we just try to make it easier for the consultant who is working on, they have to carry 2 toolkits around, right? So if you have the Nessus vulnerability scanner and you've purchased the professional feed and perhaps you're buying Canvas, what happens is you can basically leverage these products together. So the partnership we have is one for acquisition. but actually the product's been working together for a while. So if you were doing a penetration test with Immunity and you were able to get credentials to get into like a Windows 2003 server, you could actually take that NTLM hash, drop it into Nessus, do a patch audit, configuration audit, different things like that. And then if you actually had your Nessus vulnerability scan, you can feed that into Immunity, and they have a tool to go through each of the checks and do that kind of stuff. And although we have a partnership with Immunity, I know there's a lot of other vendors and SIMs who import Nessus and do things like that. So we can definitely talk about those if you want. Does that answer your question? Okay, very good. So, sir, you were talking about enterprise vulnerability scanning before. Do you want to see what that looks like? Do you want to see? All right. So the Security Center is what I'm logging on to here. Basically, the Security Center allows you to target a network and then gather logs from it via the log correlation engine, passively sniff data with PBS, or put one or more Nessus scanners out there and do active vulnerability scans. So this Security Center that I've logged on to is my demo system. I run this small network, a couple hundred hosts, mostly virtual. And what you can do is you can schedule scans. Now, if you're familiar with Nessus, you're going to recognize a lot of these different types of policies, such as a full safe check, Microsoft scans, patch audits, different things like that. But if you're in the enterprise, one of the biggest issues you have with vulnerability scanning, performing configuration audits, is managing credentials. Right? The IT people don't want to give the admin password for the domain controller. Right? The people who run DNS might not want to give out the SSH keys to get on that system. But what you can do is you can actually create policies that combine most of the Nessus features you're used to dealing with, port scans, thorough checks, different things like that. And you can actually specify credentials in the actual policy itself. And when you put these credentials in, whether they're domain, SNMP, or SSH, you can associate them with a policy, or you can actually associate them with an asset. Now, we haven't talked about assets for a second here, but this particular network, I've got a bunch of demo servers on. If I wanted to associate an asset with my Windows 2003 controller, I can just simply come in here. I can type my audit account that I'm using and my password. I could save that and do that. Now, if I gave you access to the ability to use that policy, you would have full credentials to audit your system, but you wouldn't know the password. And then every 30 days, when your corporation changes password, hopefully it's 30 days, maybe it's 90, right? It's a different process. Somebody else comes in, they change that password, but you as an auditor don't need to worry about that. And your system is you can do all your auditing with everything you need to do. Does that make sense so far?
It does. Can you make this like a one-time, or does it store it forever?
You can make it a one-time. In other words, if I wanted to just add a new scan, and I'm going to do my one-time scan, you can actually, as part of your scan scheduling, let's say I want to do a patch audit and local security checks, you can go down to the options, and then whether it was a Windows or a Unix scan, you could drop your credentials in here. So maybe you have administrator, maybe you have your password, and you could drop that in there. And so you have a lot of ways to leverage credentials, right? You can tie them to an asset, tie them to a policy, tie them to a scan. And then maybe a certain user might not have it. I can go add a user and say, hey, I just created a corporate scan policy A for the DMZ. Guess what? User A doesn't have access to that. So you can have all these different levels of access of who can do the scans. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So now the scan results is what a lot of people want to see. What does it look like? If you're familiar with Nessus, you're going to recognize the Nessus IDs in this user interface, but possibly not necessarily this output. So this is the Security Center. Small demo network, 594 different vulnerabilities. Any query that you're doing here, you can basically export as a PDF, export as CSV. Any query you're doing, you can also kind of save as a previous queries. I don't have any saved queries on this particular demo site, but you can drill down. You can search. Let's say we have some PCI auditing here. Maybe we'll just search for any thing that has the word PCI in this. So we can see what. So I have my PCI DSS type of audits right there. If I wanted to, I could summarize that by IP address. If you have the asset system going on, clicking on an IP address will pop up your information on who this is. A lot of my customers have an IP address can be in multiple assets, right? It's in the New York data center. It's a web server. It's different things like that because you can slice and dice your network however you want. We could jump right into log analysis here if we wanted to. But does that make sense so far? Does that give you a sense of that? Now, something that you can't really do from a demo is just show how easy it is to add an Nessus scanner and scan 10,000 hosts, 20,000 hosts. We have Tenable has a lot of very large enterprise customers that do full credential patch auditing for very, very large numbers of desktops, and they usually do it with maybe 10 to 15 Nessus scanners. It doesn't take a lot. A lot of customers we have in the 3,000 IP, 2,000 IP kind of range, maybe they're doing 1 or 2 scanners just to maybe depending on the topology. Maybe they want that scanner on the other side of a WAN connection, different things like that. To give you a sense of what this looks like in a larger environment, though, we're going to log on to one of our demo sites. Notice the same kind of speed. This particular security center is actually also running the passive vulnerability scanner. At this location, they're monitoring a full T3. If we do an IP summary on this particular network, we can see that they have a lot of hosts, 65,000 hosts. Actually, there's a little bit of virus activity, malware activity. Anytime one of these things talks to each other or spoofs a connection, PBS says, hey, there's a host. I just saw 2 computers talk to each other, right? So we actually go in and look for those kind of things. But if we were going to come in here and just sort maybe by plugin family the type of vulnerabilities that we're seeing, this particular demo university has a number of different things. We're doing some active Nessus scanning, and we're also doing profiling with the passive vulnerability scanner. So you can see that we've passively determined where the DNS servers are. We've had some policy violations. We've had a bunch of different things like that. Just to give you a sense of what a policy violation is, let's just drill into that there. 144 of those. So in this case, we've got an Xbox console, Twitter client. Not that Twitter's bad, but maybe from a corporate point of view, you're concerned about identifying which of my hosts actually are doing Twitter and different things like that. Does that make sense? Does that make sense so far? All right.
You recognize pornographic materials?
Sure. And at the risk of being a YouTube sensation, let's just click on that and see what we found. So in this case, and basically what we're doing, as I said earlier, we are not a DLP vendor, right? But passively, when we're identifying a web server, we can easily fingerprint, hey, it's hosting PDFs, it's hosting movies, it's hosting FTPs, it's hosting AVIs, different things like that. And why not throw a few dirty words in there? So we have a corporate policy thing that has like about maybe 100, 200 dirty words. You throw that in. Clearly this one, maybe orgasm here, maybe girls, it's that kind of stuff, right? But the cool thing is this. Look at what port this is on. This is a web server on port 25109. That's not a standard web server. So this is a good segue into let's look at the log correlation engine and see what we got on this host. So this particular IP address is a member of many, many different asset groups on this particular demo network. Let's launch we'll do a summary here. We're going to open this in a new tab. If we wanted to, we could narrowly focus on that IP address and just say, hey, passively, what do we know about that host? What is on that host? But basically, what we've done here, if we go back perhaps the last 25 days, we can look at all the net flow, all the IDS events, all of the correlated events for this particular IP address. We actually wrote a blog entry on this guy, so I'm kind of glad you mentioned something. It basically looks like some sort of botnet command and control that is being used to distribute some sort of virus or malware through pornography, which is probably not the first time that's happened. So basically, you can see over the last 25 days, there's been a number of connections. We coupled Snort. We're running the Snort with the emerging threat signature set out there. If we wanted to drill into this, we could take a look. But I actually have a whole blog entry where we actually walk through all of these connections. So basically, exactly what you happened. We saw this pornography violation, and I said, hey, why is that server serving pornography? And we saw that vulnerability just like we did in the blog there. But then we actually said, hey, show us the actual. Here's my Firefox winning again. Show us the actual list of all of the correlated events and net flows. It was pretty easy to see, when we looked at this, when it was compromised, when the backdoors happened, when the traffic started, and this was all on that port 25109. When we removed that filter and said, hey, show us everything for that host, it was even more obvious that this host, not only had this host, it was never seen before, so we had a bunch of events that were showing that. And we could even see things like the actual snort events of how this machine got compromised. So for example, these snort events right here, you saw a download a VB script. Just a few seconds later than that, you saw a network Trojan. And then finally, this infection check and geo. Basically, there's a lot of free services where you can check your IP address. A lot of malware. It says, hey, where am I in the world? So you can geo ID where you're at. So we were able to correlate all that stuff, and we're just kind of pulling out those logs and doing that. Does that make sense so far? Is that pretty good? It's pretty standard stuff for the industry, but what Tenable's uniquely brings to the game is we can do all this from one platform, which is pretty exciting. So if we just hit reset here and say, hey, what's going on in this network today? We can do a couple things that are kind of interesting. One of the things that happens is that any log, NetFlow, anything like that comes into us, we automatically categorize to a high-level type. So we have some type events here at backdoor. We have some blacklist connections. We have correlated events, denial of service events, different things like that. And these are all normalized from snort, firewall logs, different things like that. And if we wanted to drill in, we could say, hey, for those 28 blacklist events, what are they? And basically what you're looking at here is a 24-hour graph. This is from March 10th to March 11th. The gray area is 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Gives you a little visual indication of when things are happening. And basically, we have a couple blacklist events. If you're not familiar with blacklists, what we're doing is we're taking IP addresses from places like SANS, from Arbor, from emerging threats. And these are things of people that are known scanners, known spammers, known command and control. And any log that you have that has one of those IP addresses touches it, it's pretty interesting to note. Now, of course, if you have a bad guy who's scanning the internet, the fact that you got scanned with that bad guy, that's kind of interesting, but you probably knew that already. What's more interesting is that when you have an outbound blacklist communication, one of your computers has reached out to one of these servers. We always try to highlight that. So in this particular case, we had 12 events in the last 24 hours. We need to just go down and look at the raw logs for that. And you can see that these guys are ISC blacklist. This is Internet Storm Center. So we had a bunch of this is logs from, we have an agent that can do sniffing, sort of our own form of NetFlow, and can connect out and do that kind of stuff. And again, the neat thing here is that you can actually say, well, that's pretty cool, but let's just look at that IP address involved and see if there's anything else that we know about that particular host. We don't have any vulnerabilities on that. 8 other events there. If we wanted to actually say, well, let's focus on that particular IP address and just get a picture of everything that host was doing and not filter on just the outbound blacklist events, but to actually come down here and say, tell me everything that host was doing for the past 24 hours. Now we're going to paint a picture of all this person's or this IP addresses of data, whether it was snort events, whether it was this is our network activity right here. We have some snort. There was a never before seen blacklist. So this particular IP address for the entire lifetime we've been monitoring this network never had a correlated blacklist event for that. So we were able to see all that with just the click of the button. And if we wanted to, we could say, well, let's just go look at from the vulnerabilities of this host and take a look at what we know about this from a passive vulnerability scanner or perhaps active Nessus scanner point of view. So once we pivot on that IP address, we can just say, hey, let's go look at all the vulnerabilities that we know about this particular host. And passively, this guy hasn't been doing a whole lot. A couple open ports, passive OS detection, a host TTL, we know how far away it is, different things like that. Sometimes you get tons of information here. Sometimes you just get a little bit. Depends on how active the actual host is. Does that make sense so far? Does that make sense so far? What kind of questions do you have, sir? What did you want to see?
So we're doing a lot of the stuff now with Q1 Labs.
Sure.
So and we're using Nessus plugins to feed that. So I just wanted to come see the differences here and
Sure.
interface.
A couple differences. Again, there's a lot of people out there that use the Q1 stuff. What we really try to leverage is the ease of integration, and a lot of times people, they think they have correlation, but a lot of times they just don't know what they can get, right, without really working that hard. So a couple things you can get here. Passively with the PVS, we're doing all of our protocol anomaly detection with packets, not with NetFlow. Most of the Q1 stuff is typically flow-based, right? If it's an FTP, it's on port 21. We're actually not going to do that. We're going to say we want to see the actual FTP protocol, banners, gets, and stuff like that, and do that kind of stuff. But then when it comes to something like vulnerability IDS correlation, we support a lot of different intrusion detection systems. So regardless if you're doing PBS vulnerability detection, active Nessus scans, or Nessus credentialed scans, we will automatically build a correlation rule with all the different IDSs out there. Do you have an IDS, sir, that you're using?
Not currently.
Okay, so if you're using Snort, emerging threat.
We're running Snort.
Sure.
But we're not patching that stuff into Q1.
Right, and that's a lot of times I hear people say that they'll set up a SIM and they'll just get 1 or 2 log sources, right, and they're good. We say, look, the really value is when you start smashing firewall logs and NetFlow together, there's a lot of interesting stuff you can see there. When we start bringing in system logs, network logs, host logs, scanner logs into one spot, you really can gather a lot of stuff. But so the first thing we try to do is we do the automatic IDS vulnerability correlation. So in this example, about a year and a half ago, there was a Solaris -froot vulnerability. You hit telnet, you do the -froot command, and you get a admin, you get root. And we didn't have to do anything. People out there, all the IDS vendors wrote network signatures. The Tenable research team, wrote a check for that vulnerability. And once that information's in the security center, the correlation automatically happens. So we basically can do alerts like this and do filtering the GUI where basically if you get attacked with something you're vulnerable to, you can get an alert on it. And there's a lot of SIMs and products out there that claim to do this, but a lot of times what they're really doing is they're doing things like removing Windows attacks from Solaris systems. What we're doing is we're moving Solaris attacks to Solaris systems that aren't vulnerable to those attacks. So your level of alert and false positive rate is much, much, much lower with this technology, and it's automated. Another thing we do is the anomaly detection. Now, a lot of I said the folks like Q1 who started out as NBAD and got into the SIM base, what we've done is applied network anomaly detection to all of our logs. We said if we can do it with NetFlow and TCP traces and stuff like that, we can do it with the log analysis. So in this example, we're looking at all the statistical anomalies for everything that's occurred on the network. So we have firewall logs, login attempts, network traffic, and we can do alerts like this, where we basically say, hey, here's a TNM for some IP address, which is our Tenable network monitor. Basically says, hey, I saw a TCP session. And normally this host between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. has 207. Today we saw 45,000. And this is significantly because it's 111 units of a standard deviation away. What does this mean? Does this mean the Red Army, China hackers are attacking? Or does this mean that your DNS server is just, failed and this is the backup DNS server? All this says is you've had change, right? But the thing is, we'll apply this to SSH login failures. So here's a change automatically profiling all your SSH login failures. We'll apply this to firewall logs. We can even apply this to things like process creation and on the Windows side. So we actually do this type of anomaly detection so you can look at your entire enterprise and say, hey, I've had a statistical increase in something. Right? It gives you really good situation awareness, whether you're looking for an insider, a remote hacker, compromised system, or some sort of policy violation. Does that make sense? All right. And then lastly, we have a event correlation language called Tassel, very similar to the NASL language, where we just look for tons of different things. Simple things like logins from external networks. We really alert on never-before-seen events. We saw in that worm example before, hey, this blacklist event has never occurred before. This is automated. You just send the logs over to us. We automatically figure this out on a per-host basis. Very, very useful from a detecting change, or also just, hey, why is my, you shouldn't have change on your perimeter, right? If you, in your DMZ, you shouldn't have a change at 3 in the morning, right? So I don't care what IDS you have. I don't care what type of scanning you have. If there's a new process that's running, that's never been run before, and you can't trace it or explain it why, that's very useful. That's the kind of stuff we do. So does that make sense? All right. Sir, did you have other questions you wanted to?
Is there like a dashboard view that different people can get? I mean, the detail is what some of the engineers are going to need. But,
sure.
But then there's the auditors and the other people who just have the high level views.
Right. Right. So basically, what the short answer is, you can create users such that they only see the information on certain assets that are out there. So when they log in, that initial screen that we were talking about before, they would only see the trend for their network. All right. Now, what that allows them to do is create customized views of their network. So if they want to go in and basically see one query all the time, or keep it in real-time mode, they can do it. Now, we don't have the kind of widgets that you drag around that are pretty popular. You said we are working on that kind of solution. But what we've really tried to focus on is making sure that all that data that's in one spot is accessible. But the second thing that we do is we make all that data available in reporting. So as you have all these different users, you can actually set up a whole bunch of different types of reports that can be mailed out on a daily basis, right? So if they want to have a quick situation awareness, who are my top 10 login failures, which systems are new, which users are doing the most bad to my network, so to speak. You can get that kind of stuff. So we have a little wizard you can generate these reports and stuff like that. So the short, if you're looking for that, like, hey, I want to drag my Flash objects around, we're going to ship something like that shortly. But right now, we just don't have that kind of architecture in the product. So that's the other thing you're going to find out with Tenable is that we've been around for about 6 years. The folks that run it, along with myself, are fairly straightforward. We're always going to tell you, we don't do that. We do that. Here's a way to do that. We're not going to do that. So you don't have 4 or 5 layers of some 800-pound gorilla or like a VC-backed type of organization that's going to be pulling the strings. Maybe we'll get into NAC someday. Something like that. We're not going to do that. We give very, very easy answers to things like that. Other questions? Other comments?
Could you talk a little bit more about the Tenable Network Monitor that you mentioned?
Sure. So we'll just go on a small scale here. This is a small network, just a Comcast cable, internet connection, and it's got a target of about 20 or 30 VMs, and one of the VMs runs our Tenable Network Monitor. So basically, all of the traffic to and from this particular target, we log. And what we do when we log these sessions is majority of sessions are these TCP sessions short. Any session that's like less than 5 minutes, we're just going to basically come down and say, hey, look, you had a TCP session. So we can go down and look at this by port, by IP address. Was it inbound? Was it outbound? So we could drill into that. And there's a scan that happens every night and so on. But what's interesting is to actually then say, if I'm at a large university or a government agency or I'm looking for a port summary here. And I want to look at what's going on in my network. You're going to be interested in sessions that are very long or that transfer a lot of data, right? So if we come over back to this other place here, I can hit reset. Just go right into the logs. We basically will break things out by amount of data transferred and also length of session. We actually have some correlation rules where we look for long sessions with a little bit of data, or short sessions with tons of data, so you can get a sense of what's going on from a file sharing point of view. But if we drill into this, we got 1 million basically network logs here. If you look at this, and I need to stretch this out just a little bit because I'm in low resolution mode. It's not going to let me do that. But basically, if you look at these, here's a session that lasted for many hours. So we have just some high-level buckets. Here's 45-minute sessions and so on. But hey, it'd be really interesting. Let's look at all this traffic and what's a good port that's used by people for exploiting these days. A lot of worms that use port 22 to propagate SSH, right? So we're just going to go and filter all that network traffic by port 22. Hey, look at that. We got a couple different hits. And not only that, look at that. We got a spike right there of 1,246 sessions. Let's go take a look at that. So we can drill in there. So the TNM, all it says is, I had a session start, I had a session stop. The log correlation engine is taking that data and saying, you know what? Based on the data of what you logged, you had 10 gigabytes of transfer. So let me rename that to a different type of rule. So I got some IP addresses here. Maybe we can come down and say, what's the profile of this? So something that we in Tenable we call the good guys the customer ranges. And what we're going to do is say, hey, for all of those events, do a time direction summary. And for that particular filter, port 22 and the IP addresses involved, or for the thing, just do an inbound for an out. And again, that wasn't that interesting. But what you should be looking at here and say, wow, that's pretty fast. That's not something very very slow. Typically, what we deploy these on is like a CentOS or Red Hat type of system, and there's no SQL backend, there's no nothing. One of the big things we say when we go in and we talk to customers is, what's the box count you have for your current SIM, right? Okay, now throw in your current configuration auditing tool. Now throw in your current vulnerability scanning tool, whether it's a service and then we're just going to try to remove that box count. We just want to deal against a Foundstone and an RSA type of deployment. And together they had like about 8 or 9 boxes, and they're replacing that with basically 3 boxes running a bunch of different Tenable products, LCE, PBS, Nessus, different things like that. So it's everything is very, very bare metal, There's not a lot of APIs and databases between you and the application. Now I'm going out over the internet, to a system. This particular system I'm logging onto has Snort, the PVS, and the Security Center, and the TNM all running on it. You can see it's pretty zippy, and we're watching a fairly large university. So, other questions?
Could you please show us an example of rules for correlation?
Sure, sure. So what we do is we have a support portal and an RSS feed where we talk about the various rules that are out there. And I think I lost my. I'll just log on to the support portal. So the rules that are available is it's really two things. The normalization rules we call PRMs, and those are automated. So if we find a bug like in a Cisco ASA firewall, we just push out a new rule and the system gets automatically updated. That's for normalization. That's not really for correlation. But that's the thing that says, hey, I found a login failure, right? So what happens is we used to have about 100 Tassel scripts that did a wide variety of correlation, but they were very product specific, right? If I see the Snort event and this tipping point event, I know these two things together means something, right? And what we did is we actually were able to reduce the number of correlation rules by working at a higher level, just generic types. So I'll give you a good example. Let's look for brute force password guessing. Now this is a good example because what happens is, I got to find it first. If I took a poll and I said, how many login failures does it take to constitute brute force passing guessing? Is it 4? Is it 10? At what point is somebody brute forcing your system? So basically, I always answer that. Look, from a statistical point of view, we'll tell you when you have a statistical spike in login failures. You don't have to worry about that. But if you really want to have some alerting, this is a very simple script. Basically, this guy says go out and subscribe to any login failure event, whether it's the administrator logging onto a Cisco ASA firewall, or whether it's Joe in your domain trying to authenticate to your domain server. All those things are normalized as login failure. And then basically we say, hey, look, every time we get one of these events, we're going to count it, right? And we're also going to count it for the last 24 hours. And then we're going to do some interesting things like, hey, let's make sure those login failures are occurring across multiple systems. Like if I have one remote IP address and it has 1,000 login failures, but those 1,000 login failures occurred across 1,000 different systems, that's a lot different than one remote guy with 1,000 login failures on one host. So our correlation rule will pull that out. Does that make sense? Now these scripts are, it's the kind of thing where if somebody wants to do something, if they're familiar with Python, if they're familiar with NAS, if they're familiar with Perl, it's very easy to write these things. We have hash tables, we have all the kind of things you would like to do. I talk to a lot of customers who are very frustrated with, hey, I want to just correlate. I want to do something more than correlate if A and B happen within 5 minutes of each other. And it's very difficult to do that in a lot of these wizards where you generate custom events and things there. Let's say you wanted to alert anytime there's a new MAC address that's been added to your network, regardless of the source. So we have a script for that. But basically what happens is we get a lot of feedback from our customers, and whether it's either a feature requests for these kind of scripts or ideas for scripts, or from our research sites, when we see different types of compromises, we'll go and we'll write new scripts. So did you want to see a specific type of correlation, or? Okay, not a problem. Sir, do you have any other questions?
So I have a question. As far as disk space and retention periods, so especially if you're sucking data off a big network,
sure,
you're millions and millions of data points that you're grabbing. So how do you handle? Obviously, at some point you would want to start compressing them, and that's where you're going to start having speed and performance issues with reporting and analysis. So is that easily definable?
Yep.
And outside of that, what's like compression ratios?
Sure. So I'll answer the compression ratios first. Compression ratios vary wildly depending on the size or the type of logs you send, right? If you send checkpoint firewall logs, which are a little bit shorter than perhaps a Snort log, then you're not going to have as much compression if you shoot one for the other. But of course, if your checkpoint firewall log is smaller than Snort, maybe a compression ratio doesn't really matter. But there's really two things that kind of go sort of in our favor. So the first thing is because we've indexed everything. Let me just show you a quick example. So I got DNS here. I don't think this particular network we're doing DNS queries, but there's another network that I log onto for demos. Let me just search this. So I got 401 refresh and progress events. I'm not a DNS guy. I don't even know what that means. But if we go down, and if I wanted to, I could click on that, and the product would tell me, hey, this is what that rule means. But I'm just trying to show a demonstration of picking an event and searching it. Unlike Google, unlike a lot of log aggregation tools where they actually tell you, hey, just search it, right? You can actually come in here and type in your output filter, the pattern you're looking for. And just because I don't know a good example, I'll pick a port here. So I'll do 508, whoops, 51354. And this could have very well been, our Gula, a login failure that you want to look for SSH or things like that. But because we already index things and compress things way ahead of time, your searches are a lot faster. So see how that came back, and I got everything with 5134. So that's the first thing. Now the second thing is from an architecture point of view, the way we've set things up. Security Center is the item that does the heavy lifting, so to speak. But from a log correlation engine point of view, you can actually point to multiple LCEs and do distributed queries. And the queries happen extremely fast. So in this example, I got 2 LCEs, and I've done a query for the network traffic. You can see that this guy here had a small tail of network spikes. This guy here had some continuous activity. But when you query them together, they just get smashed together. So what happens is that, let's say you've got, I don't know, 5 or 6 LCEs, and you want to put 20, 30 terabytes of logs for this thing. You don't have to put it through one server. You can put it through multiple LCEs and do that kind of stuff from a centralized point of view. Does that make sense?
Yeah. As far as searching, so the search that you just did, how far back is that looking? Is that looking historically?
It's gonna go as far back as you want it to. Now my default filter there was 24 hours.
Okay.
If I said let's go for 30 days, if I've narrowly done that search on those 401 records, maybe for 30 days I only have 20,000 records. So I'm only searching the index thing. So a lot of times what happens with these log search tools, you search the whole thing and they come up with dynamic pattern matches and different things like that. Those searches take a lot longer. But when you're working with the normalized data like we have, you have 2 advantages. One, we're probably not going to keep, from a normalized point of view, things that aren't that interesting, right? So if you, for example, you have MySQL, it's generating a bunch of logs, we're going to normalize the stuff that's really interesting. Starts, stops, errors, reboots, new installs, upgrades, user logons, things like that. If there is a certain type of status message or something like that that's not really important from a SIM or security or compliance point of view, probably going to ignore that, right? Now, if you want to do full log aggregation, we definitely have the ability to feed into something like that. But for the most part, most of what people have a requirement to store and search, the way we do it, people say, hey, I can get to my data a lot quicker when it comes to that. I'll give you a good example. There's a customer of ours had they distribute a lot of online media. I'll put it that way. And one of the things they do is they log all their DNS transactions. So a lot of people have a DNS server with logging on, but they don't enable actual DNS query logging. Anytime you type google.com, there's a log that says, hey, this IP went to Google or did a query for google.com. And they had a couple virus outbreaks, and these viruses did particular DNS lookups. And what they were able to do is go to the DNS logs, and for the last 30, 35 days or so, type in that pattern and search it, and the query took like a minute. And then boom, export as a CSV. I got a list of IPs. I can do some by IP on that, even go in and do an asset summary, all those kind of things I was showing you in the Security Center. So it's very, very easy to get that information. And then actually what they did is they took those IPs, they created a list, and they said, well, let me show all the vulnerabilities for these guys. So it was boom, boom, boom. Probably within a half hour from start to finish, they had a complete audit of which machines probably were doing infected with a particular virus. Does that make sense? Okay. So any other questions?
Well, on the main Security Centers,
sure.
There were 2 options on the left. There was a save as query and save
yeah.
as incident.
So pretty much what we do here is the idea is that if you're going to go in and mine this data, you can do 2 things. I'm going to show it at a different site because this one has some. Let's go back to this one. Basically, the idea is if you want that sort of dashboard sort of look and feel, you can basically have some queries that are saved. Maybe you want to look at all the blacklist events for the last 30 days, and that's the first screen you want to see when you log on. So you can actually go to your queries and say, here's all my private queries, here's all my shared queries, and the only difference between a query and an incident is the time frame. If I want to do something look at all my blacklisted correlated events, for example, and then see for the last 30 days, I don't want to look for a fixed 30 days in time, right? I want to do the last 30 days, the last 7 days, the last open list of things like that. So that's the difference between a query and an incident. And then you can basically have these things public and private. When you create a query, so if I wanted to actually create a query, may want to save this as a query. I get the name here. What's the name? Am I going to share this? What's the description? And the difference is if I have an event, I want to have a distinct time frame with that, so I can go and leverage that at a later date. Does that make sense? Yeah, sure. Okay. So yeah, so a lot of times when we log on to these sites and maybe we'll have a research customer. A lot of times Tenable gets involved. If there's anybody out there on the internet, if you want to actually work with us, we'll give you a free product as long as you give us free access to the data. But a lot of times it's because they don't have either budget or staff who even understands what is NetFlow or how to even set up a snort or something like that. But a lot of times what we'll do is we'll go in and say, hey, look, IP address 1.1.1, serving porn, got a virus, scanning you really need to shut them down. We'll just create a ticket so that one of these queries and say, hey, go here, you can see all the logs, all the proof you need, and so on. And it's the same kind of system over on the vulnerability side. And vulnerabilities, you get a little bit more workflowish, where you can say, hey, all the computers who have this vulnerability, you need to fix it by Friday. Or maybe all the computers who have this vulnerability but aren't on these certain asset lists. It's a way to do false positive management, suppress results, different things like that. So, cool. Other questions, other comments?
As far as incident response and assignments and links into any other ticketing systems,
sure.
How do you guys manage that?
So we don't have a lot of links into ticketing systems and whatnot, but what you can do is you can hard code a URL based on an IP address. So I don't think I have a specific example of that. Maybe I do. But basically, as an administrator, let's say you had a corporate asset system, a corporate ticketing system. Let's say you had like Squeal or some sort of web interface to snort or something like that. If you knew the IP address and there was a URL to kind of hard code getting into that thing, you can drop that URL into the security center, and then when you click on certain things, you'll get to see that, and these links will be right here. Some of the blog entries and video demos I have online at nessus.org, I actually have links out to MaxMind and stuff like that. But I have a couple customers where they have. I have this one university down south that has they had a bunch of students. They have a proprietary asset management system, right? But basically, the URL to get into this thing, one of the fields was an IP address. It gave you everything that they knew about that IP address. So they were able to not only pull data out of that to build asset lists in the security center, but they were also able to log in and get the proprietary who owns this, what building is it in, different things like that. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Any questions?
So all of these products function standalone, right? The LCE, the PBS, and then the security center essentially ties them all together.
Right. So, obviously if you're a Nessus user and you want to run Nessus, we have a client for that. And we support, there's a lot of active development there. But from an enterprise point of view, most of our customers, buy the security center and Nessus, because that's a lot of times how people come to us, but they'll extend us into the log analysis space or the passive space. And Tenable's been around about 6 years right now, so we actually have a lot of customers coming buying the whole suite right from the beginning, just because they're looking at a technology refresh, they're looking at something like that. Plus, a lot of the budget constraints. Maybe in the past it was a luxury to buy my favorite SIM, buy my favorite embed, buy my favorite scanner, buy my favorite 5 products. But hey, if we can replace all that with one vendor, there's a lot of value with something like that. So we are seeing a lot of really good new customers. I think because of that. But yeah, to get, if you get the security center and Nessus, you don't have to buy the professional feed. So if you're looking at having maybe 8 or 9 Nessus scanners on your network and you want to get them managed by the security center, you don't need to do that. You don't need to buy a separate professional feed. which is very useful. You can still do your own scans with an Nessus client, upload the results in a security center, which is pretty cool, and whatnot. But very good, very good. Any questions, sir? I know you came in a bit late, but okay. Actually, for the folks on the internet, there's a sea of thousands and thousands of customers out there just kind of watching, and they're burning the lighters right now and doing things like that. So, very good. If there aren't any other questions, I'll leave it at that.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of Source. And the tape's still running, so don't say anything about anybody. Political parties, product vendors, speakers.